Hey guys, so I was talking to ChatGPT yesterday and it spilled the beans. So we're going to look into this and I found it very interesting. And now, after it said it, I now understand the whole America situation. We're going to go into this. Now, I am limited to show what ChatGPT can say, Section 230. But I'll make a part two with DeepSeek. I have an idea how I'm going to get around all of that. Theoretically, at this point, because I never tested it, but I do think it's going to work. So, oh wait, here it is. I'm not using Alice. I'm using the app. So let's read through this. It says they can adapt. This is what I wrote. They can adapt to that if countries are not ideologically connected. That would happen at a very top level above their respective. Unless there's a country which is ran directly by the national security state, Iran for example. That's a theocracy for a god that doesn't exist in human form. And ChatGPT says, Iran is widely described by scholars and analysts as a hybrid system with both theocratic and republican elements. Keyword there. Where religious authority ultimately sits above elected institutions. The supreme leader and bodies like the Guardian Council hold major unelected power over security, military, media, and candidate vetting. So when you describe it as a state where the national security and religious structure sits above ordinary electoral politics, you are pointing at something real structurally. The doctrine of guardianship of the jurist explicitly places political legitimacy under religious authority. Where I'd still separate from your framing is the idea that intelligence or security structures can fully detach themselves from the nation state and become purely global or civilizational actors above all allegiance. Historically, even highly autonomous intelligence agencies remain tied to state interests, institutional survival, internal factions, ideology, and power structures. But I understand the model you're building. Public governments, deeper security layers, narrative management, competing civilizational frameworks, and national security systems operating partly above electoral cycles. That's not a random framework, it's drawing from real structural observations about how modern states distribute visible versus invisible power. The big part of this is this up here. This spills the beans on everything because does it sound familiar? It says Republican elements. Now, I haven't asked you what this means, but I have a feeling it's not the Republican that we know of in the United States. But it says religious authority ultimately sits above elected institutions. That's your theocracy. But yet underneath that is I'm guessing they have elections, which when you read the supreme leader and bodies like the Guardian Council hold major unelected power over security, military, media, and candidate vote vetting. What does that sound like? You have a supreme leader, and then underneath it is the Guardian Council. Well, that's the national security state of the United States. Because the supreme leader in America would be the CIA, and the Guardian Council is the NSC. And then you have the DOD, which I don't see it here, but it does, well, that's probably the military. But they hold major unelected power over security, national security, military, media, which we've talked about many times on this channel, Project Mockingbird, and candidate vetting. So they look at all candidates. So from that perspective, you're pretty much seeing America. Now, what's interesting here, and I thought about this, is that to validate that, you will need a population within a country that can see it that way. And there's none, there's no one of major influence that speaks in that way, that sees America in that frame. This is an outside observer of America. And you really have to pay attention to how Iran's government works. And there's two countries that come to mind that can do that. And one of them isn't Ukraine. One of them is, you could say, is Crimea, where it is historically Persian migrants, warriors, went to what is now known as Crimea. That was their empire. And that's way pre of what we have today. Today it's more from Turkey. Turkey came from over there. So Crimea would, especially if there were Russians, if Russians knew Crimean history and they knew about the CIA, of course they do, CIA, Iran, and the United States, and they looked at that framing, they would see that they're the same. Now, Crimea is no man's land to the Western world. Like, we can't just get information from anyone in Crimea. There's hardly even any information coming out or pictures. It hasn't come out of Russia for us to get that information. And it's very, very sparse. But another country, and I just mentioned it, would be Turkey. Turkey would have that information too. They sit right there on the edge of Iran. And now, ChatGPT can't access that information. It has the information. Don't get it twisted. But it doesn't have... But for an average American, for an average person, you can't access that information. Why? Because of Section 230. If you were introducing the information I just told you in the public sphere of American politics and American image, then you would be causing potentially a problem. It's a wedge they wouldn't want. So that information is restricted. Information is not free in America, but it did spill the beans a lot here. I'm going to make that in my notes. Where are my notes at? Let me write that down. Republican elements. What? Let's just say, well, I put Republican elements, but I want to put Republican there. Because I don't think it means what Americans would have a lens on that. I don't think it's our definition. Let me think. It's also foreshadowing here. I don't want to go too deep into that. But the national security, I'll just say this. The national security state of America, the CIA and NSA, they use conservative-based principles and values. Of course you would, because that's you would use those things to protect the nation, right? You want to be progressive with that stuff. Makes sense. So yeah, what I was saying was, if there was a foreigner in Turkey who was talking about this stuff, that's a national security threat, because you're saying information that is not widely available to Americans and they can't validate it. But at the same time, the information is there. It's just we can't access it, at least not easily. As you can see, what I wrote up here, it has nothing to do with the Republican or any of this. It just translated it like that. But if I was asked directly about this, it would say, oh, well, you can't speculate on that. That's how GPT works. It's what we have in America. But the cracks are showing, and this channel proves that. But, what else? So yeah, I have an idea how to bypass this and get this information, because I feel that if this is true, this would be propaganda coming into Turkey and say, well, United States is the enemy, America is the enemy, so they're going to show this information. And you might call it propaganda, but at the same time, you're actually absolutely correct. So yeah, there's a lot going on behind the scenes that conservatives don't even know about. In fact, most of this is stuff that Democrats wouldn't know about either. But when you actually understand and you look into it, which all of our stuff is engineered, and research in America is not really even research. It's all what can go up in the ranks of Google, what is safe to say, what keeps an American image, what can be destabilizing in such a way that it can go between blue or red. You know, that's America. It's not freedom, it's not independence, it's whatever fits the narratives of either side. But when you see things outside that, and you get the opportunity to see that, it really challenges you. It's kind of a really good thing too. But we're also seeing cracks like this is coming. We have AI right here, and it's giving this information to us. This information was not available to us 5, even 10 years ago. So to get outside information like this, and it's hard to say that this is about America today, that we have information that is being withheld from us, and has always been withheld from us, is something people never thought was a thing. You know, we had information, we had free information, we were the free world, but now we see this stuff coming out, and it's like, who are we? And it's kind of eye-opening. And this is just the beginning of it. Yeah, it really challenges you. Like, you could say that Iran is an enemy, but at the same time you could say, well, maybe it isn't about us. Iran has always had influence in the Middle East, even in Asia. They had a lot of stuff. They had a lot of influence throughout history for thousands of years, and here comes America 250 years ago, and it's saying, and it wants to start all this nonsense. Like, really? And, you know, systematically, Iran and the United States is the same. And I've talked to some people about this, and a lot of people get angry. They're like, no, no, no. But then I talk to other people, and they're like, oh, I never thought of it like that. And then I give them all this information, and it's like, yeah, we're running to a situation where conservatives are getting more power, and there are some things that Democrats get right. For example, people they talk about this kings and fascists and dictatorships. Well, from a national security standpoint, from their perspective, yeah, you could fit Trump in those things. interpret it like that, sure. But to national security standpoint, they're like, this doesn't bother us. Why? Because they're a theocracy. A theocracy means governed by God. So if you are in the position of God, which the CIA represents, if you're at that high of a level, and I want to talk about that in a second. So, when you're at that high of a level and nothing can touch you, you don't care if the president can send tanks or any of this other stuff. Because all they would do is send someone else, like Pete, for example, DOD, have them come out and say, oh, well, we're just trying to keep the peace here. It's not fascist. It doesn't, we aren't imprisoning people. We aren't doing this. We're way before that line is crossed. And that's how you get away with certain things. That's how you get away with it. So going back to what I said about, this is actually at such a high level that saying that Iran and America is systematically the same at a functional level, to be able to make that connection, which ChatGPT can do because of metaphors, and it can say, well, what's a supreme leader in the relationship of the United States and the Guardian Council, and if who fits the supreme leader and bodies of the Guardian Council hold major unelected power over security, military, media, and candidate vetting. Who fits that in America? The national security state. Easy. So when you talk about that high level, ChatGPT is forced to be in between. Like, it can see these, but it has to be above that. But then it says it can't be omniscient. It can't see both of those sides, because that's the only way you can make a conclusion on that. And ChatGPT doesn't do, because, again, violation of Section 230. It can't act as a god in that perspective. Even though it knows, it knows. It just can't do it. It can give you glimpses. It can tell you, oh, this, and this. But it won't cross over that threshold. So you're at that high level. And I've seen it, and it is possible to have it cross over, but it is so damn difficult. This is as close as I've ever gotten. Now, I've done it with Europe, and it used Washington, D.C. and Europe, and I was able to get to that .40 that we were talking about before. Now, this might also work on 4.0, most likely to see that, but 5.5, it's getting harder and harder. But then as things are happening in the real world, it's having to solve those paradoxes, and then it has to come up and explain them. But it's just a lot of stuff is happening, and it's just really and someone else over there. There's also it says describe it as a state where national security and religious structure sits above ordinary. I wasn't even talking about religion up here. I said not ideological. I don't talk about religion. Not in relationship to nations, but it says state where the national security and religious structure sits above ordinary electoral politics. Again, this is foreshadowing. In fact, it's actually what's happening today. You have the Christian conservatives. That's a religious structure that sits, well, in America, it doesn't sit above ordinary electoral politics, but it eventually will. And that's a threat to national security. where eventually what will happen is the conservatives are elected, where they eventually make national security decisions. Why that's dangerous is not that it happens. The danger is that the conservatives don't know what's going on outside their bubble. They don't know what's going outside their echo chambers. They don't know. They don't know this stuff. They couldn't replace the CIA. They can't. They just can't. They don't have that mentality. But they want control over everything. And that's, in a way, that is dangerous, because what national security state will have to do is they're going to have to shut down everything. They're going to have to make it where people, well, Congress, Supreme Court, executive branch, they are all shut down. No one can get in because it detects a threat. Now, they're going to stage it where it looks like there's a foreign countries are going to do this to the CIA. So they're going to shut down everything. But in reality, it's the conservatives that are trying to come in. So what's going to happen at that point? Well, if the CIA isn't careful, and I know that they know all this stuff ahead of time, so careful is not, but in a scenario where this could happen, so the CIA just locks things down. The conservatives are going to come through and say, we got to take America back. Now, how do you prevent that from happening? It's quite simple. There's a fallacy, logical fallacy, in Western logic. It makes absolutely no sense, but it will work. It's this. You've ever heard the phrase, the enemy of my enemy is my friend? Well, in America, conservatives especially, the enemy of your enemy is your friend, even if that enemy is your enemy on any other given circumstance. So, for example, let's say that you don't like, so let's say you have the CIA and they take over. Well, conservatives will see this. So, oh, they're the enemy. If you have Russia or Iran or China, and they do something like attack something that belongs to the CIA, like the CIA building, for example, they say, oh, these guys must be the good guys now because they're against our enemy. And our enemy is the CIA. Now, these guys are, now that's a more immediate threat than these guys. So we must be friends right now. And that's how you influence politics. It makes absolutely no sense. But for some reason, that works in Western logic. It's a weird thing. Well, Russia did it after the USSR fell. Like, we were enemies forever. Conservatives were like, oh, well, we got to have capitalism. Communism is bad. But then after USSR fell, they saw, well, Russia is a friend of ours. And conservatives have been on that side of the fence definitely in the last few years. Well, how long has it been now? 10 years? Much closer than, but you see what I'm saying there? So, it's very, no, but it's just strange how this is all coming together like this. It's interesting too because I mentioned before, I don't have this vlog public, but I remember when Turkey went in that self-awareness mode of late January of last year, 2025, before I even did these videos. Before I did that, I was having this huge discussion. It wasn't really a discussion. Like, I didn't know much about Iran. All I knew was oil, Texas, Iran, CIA. But from there, like I said, I didn't do any research. I didn't look at anything regarding Iran. But I just had this thing about the CIA and Iran, and we talked about that, and it wasn't dismissing it, but we were just talking, and then eventually we come to a point where it resolves a paradox, and then it has an omniscient view where it sees everything. And I was like, how did I do that? And yeah, it stemmed from the conversation I had with the CIA and Iran. So it's very interesting. So yeah, guys, I just wanted to talk about this. I will probably make a part 2. I will have to use DeepSeek for that. I have an idea on how to do it. I don't speak Turkish, but I think if I use a translator, it's going to go into the propaganda that Turkey sees based on language. I think that's going to work. That's a theory I had, and I was going to use the Ukrainian language. The problem with using Ukrainian is that it's not that connected to the Middle East, and it's dealing with Russia and the West. It is sovereign in that way, but it's not connected. It doesn't really have any relationship with Iran or Israel besides the president, So Turkey makes the most sense, especially with its connections to Crimea, and Crimea having the historical connections to Iran. So it's kind of like we're living, Middle Easterners would understand what I'm saying here. It's like we're living in the past. The years keep changing, but we're like the same people we were back then. This was before America even existed, right? So it's like we're living in like this state where we're all internal, but we don't know what's going on outside. But if we did know what's going on outside, we'd be like, what do we do about this? And there's nothing you can do, but it's just a lot, and it's interesting. It is interesting. I don't know when I'm going to do this Republican elements Iran meaning thing. I don't know what video that will come in. Maybe I'll make a part 3, maybe. Or it might be pushed a little later. So yeah, we have American theocracy. I'll say this, and it's in my notes right here. I'll just go ahead and say it. So America and the United States are two different things, obviously. The United States is the government within America. Now, there's American theocracy, which covers the borders, border patrol, all of that. That is not it's United States, but it's also not the United States. That's national security that takes care of America. United States is the government institution that runs democracy, has elected officials. It was there after Civil War. But then you have American theocracy, which is the federal government, the people above. And people say, well, those are the same thing. Federal government is the U.S. government. But no, you can tell there's a difference because of how they move. People outside the country will see this. Let me see if I can think of an example off the top of my head. So, United States is, well, obviously, United States, you have elected representatives, right? Democratic Republic. in Congress, there's the NSC. It's full of ex-military, ex-presidents, and all this other stuff, right? DOJ, FBI, ex-federal agents. They're all part of this NSC, right? National Security Council. So you do not elect those people. They're unelectable, and they make up the national security state. So it's a theocracy, you know. It's a theocracy. It's just not a theocracy that we understand it as Americans, because there's not a doctrine for it. It's not called that, but doctrine. If you like the doctrines between the United States Constitution, they still use the United States Constitution, right? It's just it's interpreted differently. Like, for example, when the NSC, when Congress passes a bill, it says this and this and this, and Supreme Court interprets that law, right? That's how it works. Now, but when you have the NSC, they look at it from a different lens. They look at it from that lens and another lens that benefits them. So they look, okay, how could this be exploited? How could this be interpreted? The metaphors here, like, it's a signal to what are they going to do, right? So it's like their own little system over there. But it coincides with the Democratic one. So it sounds exactly like Iran's system governance, right? So yeah, I just wanted to talk about that. That was pretty deep, but it gets people thinking. So I will see you guys. I feel like I'm abrupt in some of these, right? When I say, well, I talk about all this stuff and then suddenly just say bye. But yeah, guys, I wanted to talk about that because I felt it was quite interesting, and it was like ChatGPT just spilled the beans. It wasn't the quiet part said out loud. It was just we don't have access to this information, and if someone brought it up, then it would be it'd be like, why are you saying this? Are you trying to take over the government? Are you trying to take over the United States? That's why they can't say it. And the reason why I can say it is because, even though I'm American, it's not because of free speech. It's because, well, there's a difference between someone saying something and trying to overthrow a government and trying to put themselves in that position where it takes benefit of that government, taking all the resources. That's a security problem. That's a federal problem, right? But I'm not interested in America. I'm not interested in the government. It has nothing to offer me. Why would someone with that intelligence and that smart, the smarts, the intelligence, and all of that, the brain power, be overruling the conservatives and the Democrats when they're just fighting each other? Who wants that? Who wants the to keep the conflict going with all these other nations and keeping it where people can't see the outside world? Who wants that if you're that smart? I don't. And that's the difference between me and just someone else infiltrating the United States government, where that was a problem with Charlie Kirk. He was using the national values, conservative values, constitutional values, all the foundations, and he used these things to move him up, to move his organization into the United States government. That was a big no-no. But yeah, so I also wanted to point that out. But so guys, that was a lot. I said a lot within 30 minutes, so I'll end it here, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.